What's up, fellow travelers? Today we're at one of the most famous, most Instagrammable, most touristed places on the planet, the Phi Phi Islands of southern Thailand. While we generally like staying off the beaten path a little, Phi Phi actually does check all of our boxes. Linguistic intrigue, resilience to natural disasters, social productive forces being used to rebuild, colonial paradoxes, fucking gorgeous cliffs and beaches, and lots of lazy cats. So let's deep dive the Phi Phi Islands. For ease of use, we'll be using the Thai word ko for island, and for any readers of Thai, which we are not, hello, we love you, thanks for watching, but the complexities of Thai grammar are way beyond the scope of this video, so, you know. Anyway, Koh Phi Phi Don is the largest of the islands in the archipelago, and is the only of the 6 islands that's permanently inhabited. It's located about 46 kilometers from Phuket in the Andaman Sea, part of the Indian Ocean. The name, haha, Phi Phi, comes from the Malay word phrase Pulau Api Api, the fiery isle. The main island is made up of 2 karst mountain structures that are connected by an isthmus, which is one of my favorite words, made of a sandbar that stretches between the 2 mountains. This will be important in a later segment about the tsunami. The main town on the island, Banton Sai, sits on the small strip of sand between the peaks. Oh, just a quick cut in here, there are no cars on the island, and while you'll see some motorbikes around, for the most part, everything is pushed along on these wagons, and everyone gets around on foot. Anyway. The official population of the island is about 2,500 people, but this is deeply misleading and pretty problematic as it's a wild misrepresentation of the number of people actually staying on the island at any given moment of the day, whatever day it is. So let's consider the demographic reality of the island. At the northern tip of the island is the town of Laem Thong, with a tiny population of 300 to 500 people. These people are the natives of the island, of the Urak Lawai ethnicity, who we'll cover more in a little bit. There are also many legally Thai but ethnically Malay Muslims who have lived here for centuries. Then we have the largest group. These are Thai citizens who are registered in other parts of the country, but they're here because they work here. This includes management workers from the Bangkok region, but also the largest portion is made up of Isan, people from northeast, near Laos. There are also large populations of migrant workers, as we discussed in the last episode, from Myanmar and the Philippines, and of course the 5,000 or so tourists who visit the island on a daily basis. The languages of the island actually paint a really explicit picture of the island's history. First, Urak Lawai, an Austronesian language from the Malayic branch, Southern Thai dialect, representing the regional connection, and Standard Thai, representing the connection to empire. It might be a little difficult to see Thailand as an empire, what with it being 2026 and all, but it is. The next layer is the one brought by the tourists. Everything from Russian and Ukrainian. Actually, let me just pause us for a quick second and pass down a piece of wisdom that was imparted onto us by a Siberian lady on a prior trip to Thailand. Russians and Ukrainians can't agree on anything. That is, except for Thai beaches. Anyway, back to the video. To Chinese and Japanese, to Brazilian Portuguese and Kiwi English, showing the connection that the island has cultivated with the rest of the world. We mentioned the term sea gypsy in the last episode, and weren't quite clear about a few things related to these people, so let's clear those up right now. The term often gets translated into English as sea gypsies because it sounds exotic, probably, but the Thai term, Chao Lei, can also be translated as nomads of the sea. The term encompasses 3 distinct ethnic groups with different languages, origins, and relationships to the land and sea. There are 3 main groups of these sea nomads here in Thailand. The Urak Lawai, as mentioned before, who are Austronesian Malayic, with populations all throughout the Adan Islands in the region. The next group is Moken. They speak a language known as Moken, part of the Mokenic family, that is actually a branch of the Malayo-Polynesian, a sibling group to the Malay language branch, spoken mostly by the nomadic sea people which stretch from the islands off the coast of western Myanmar to the tip of southern Thailand. A sibling language of Moken is Moklen, and this is spoken by a closely related people group who are land-based on the Phang Nga coast of mainland Thailand. As one can expect once provided with the information just covered, we can clearly determine that sea gypsy is a colonial term used to refer to a periphery population, not something that they would call themselves. All three of these local languages are considered endangered by UNESCO, and it's unfortunate that over the next couple of generations, they'll likely be gone completely. Interestingly though, they have a term, munwian, which means to cycle, as they move cyclically through the islands during different times of the solar cycle, or, the year. Now, we actually have mitochondrial DNA research that points to the Chaoley being connected to something called the Austronesian expansion period, which was a time that people that all spoke the same language and from probably Indonesia expanded west as far as Madagascar, east as far as Hawaii, and as far north as Taiwan. The natives there, anyway. It's just an interesting side note that the Papuan people of PNG are not Austronesian. They've survived as their own thing. Anyway. Exact routes and times of arrival are still debated academically, but the people groups that make up the Chaoley were definitely here before the formation of modern nation-state boundaries in the area. We'll get into the 2004 tsunami in greater detail later in the video, as it's really important to the story of modern Phi Phi. But we'll touch on it here shortly to point out an important aspect that delineates these people from the mainlanders. When the tsunami was about to hit, the Chaoley peoples knew from traditional cultural osmosis that when the water recedes, move inland. While over 1,000 people on the island died in the disaster, almost none of the Chaoley did. This just goes to show that the people with the least material wealth and the highest survival rates because they are the ones most in tune with their habitat. This connection to the land and sea is beginning to die out, unfortunately, as the peoples of these groups are further assimilated into Thai society, with many of the younger generations no longer being able to speak their own languages to pass down these traditions. Many of them having joined the tourism industry for work or enmeshed themselves into mainland society to be closer to the amenities of modernity. The Chaoley people didn't, as many of their Austronesian counterparts did, take part in the broad conversion to Islam, as much of the region did from the early 7th century, remarkably shortly after the religion was established. Instead, these peoples are, broad generalizations, animists, believing in spirits of the sea of particular mountains and islands, with the distinction between natural and supernatural not being clearly defined. The Arak Lawai have an interesting bi-yearly tradition, happening the 6th and 11th month of the lunar calendar. That is their most important holiday. They make ceremonial boats out of a particular type of palm tree and fill it with offerings for the ancestors and the spirits of the sea, along with all of their bad luck, and they push it out to sea as a sacrifice. This holiday lasts for 3 days and is called Loi Rua. Let's look at the languages again, because it's a very interesting family tree. So we start with Austronesian, as mentioned before. It likely originated somewhere in Indonesia, and as it spread east, it evolved into what's known as Malayo-Polynesian. From here, it branched off into two main branches, the Malayic branch that contains both modern Standard Malay and the Arak Lawai language. The other branch is the Moklenic branch, which is made up of both modern Moken and Moklen. The interesting part here is that Arak Lawai is actually closer to Standard Malay than it is to either of the Moklen languages, despite having such a small population in such close vicinity. Just a quick thing here for the language nerds out there. Apparently, one of the most obvious markers is that all of the Proto-Malayan words that came to be part of the Assamese, Chamic, and Malayic language families had the k sound dropped for a h sound. This includes Arak Lawai. Since it came out after the split, it kept the k sound in Arak. The Moklenic languages, however, enforced the k sound, so an Arak Lawai speaker would likely refer to their Moken or Moklen neighbors as Mohen or Mohlen, which isn't super important, but neat. All these languages are said to have heavy Austroasiatic influences, and longtime viewers of the show will know that Vietnamese and Khmer are some of the biggest Austroasiatic languages. Most Austronesian languages use a descendant of the word manok, for example, in the Philippines. Manok is the word for chickens, specifically. But the Moklenic languages use the word chim for bird, and our Vietnamese speakers will immediately know that this is suspiciously close to the Vietnamese word chim for birds. There is a really good paper written at the Chungnam National University in Samsung, Korea that we'll link in the description that points out that Moclenic languages have loanwords from Nicobarese, Khmer, and Burmese, not just Thai and Malay, implying they got around a lot, and were likely much more of a force in previous millennia than they are today. Now, we can't really discuss the context of this island without getting back to the tsunami of 2004. It was caused by an earthquake that had an epicenter just off the western coast of Sumatra, the westernmost major island in Indonesia. The earthquake itself is worth looking at because it was unprecedented in a couple of different ways. Being registered in a magnitude of 9.3, it remains the third largest earthquake in recorded history and by far the most powerful to ever hit Asia. The rupture lasted up to 10 minutes, making it the longest fault duration ever observed anywhere on the planet. Up to 1,600 kilometers of fault lines slipped, which displaced the seafloor by several meters. This sudden and dramatic uplift displaced an estimated 30 cubic kilometers. Let me say that again. 30 cubic kilometers of water. This displaced water sent essentially a pulse of energy out in all directions, including east to Phi Phi, at up to 800 kilometers an hour. While in deep water, this would have only been perceptible by a change in water surface height of about a meter over 5 or so minutes, then retreating, meaning that anyone on a boat in the deep sea would likely not have even noticed it. But as the water gets shallower and the seafloor rises, the increased friction with the seafloor slows the wave, but causes it to pile up much higher in something called a run-up. Northern Sumatra was hit first, in between 15 and 30 minutes, with run-up reaching 51 meters. Thailand was then hit about an hour and a half later, run-up reaching between 5 and 20 meters depending on location. Even Somalia, in Eastern Africa, was hit 7 hours after the initial earthquake with waves of over 10 meters, with hundreds dying there an entire ocean away. Now, the isthmus that Banton Sai sits on, the main population center of the island, runs east to west. When we look at it from above, we can see how the wave passing eastward would be caught by Tonsan Bay in the south, and even more so by Lo Dalam Bay in the north, funneling the energy in. The isthmus only makes it to 2 meters above sea level in the middle, wiping out over 70% of the buildings on the island. At least 1,000 people died on this island alone that day. At least that's what the official number is, the real number likely being quite a bit higher, probably double. The populations of actual locals on the island know tsunamis as Labun, the Great Wave, and recognizing that when the water pulled away from the coast that it's going to come rushing back in. Expecting this, the communities headed up into the mountains, and as a result, only 11 were lost from these communities, literally hundreds of times less. On the nearby Surin Islands, another island with a significant Moken population, they didn't lose anyone. The stories that had been passed down through generations about these Labun saved more people than the modern infrastructure of Koh Phi Phi did. Koh Phi Phi Don was rebuilt quickly. The way in which it happened is its own story worth deep diving, but we'll stick to the basics here. In the 2010 book, Recreating Paradise, the Post-Tsunami Visual Economy of Thailand's Phi Phi Islands, one of the most comically overpriced books I've ever seen. I mean, come on, $156 dues for a paperback? Get the fuck out of here. And this isn't the part where we sarcastically tell you that pirating PDFs is bad. Anyway. In the book, he highlights a majority of the labor involved in cleaning up the island actually came from a transient volunteer labor force made up of primarily Western tourists, who cleared the wreckage and started to rebuild in only a few months. The most interesting aspect of this is that the primary force for rebuilding wasn't the massive corporate interests that extract value from the island. It wasn't even the national government that handled it. It was a grassroots-led campaign by concerned individuals from around the world. The disaster has been incorporated into the story of the island, a complex and emotionally charged layer of the paradise dynamic of the place. Most of the people who took part in the immediate clearing and rebuilding efforts weren't paid to be there. They were actually paying to be there and working for free. This brings us to another important issue. In 2006, an underwater memorial was built, obviously only accessible to divers, The next year, in 2007, a group of volunteers built a memorial on land to honor the victims of the tsunami at the beachfront on the south side of the isthmus at Lo Dalem Bay. Every year, there are Buddhist, Islamic, and Christian prayers and ceremonies to remember those washed away that day. This brings us to another very important story of the island chain, Maya Bay. The name actually comes originally from Sanskrit, with Maya meaning illusion, a particularly fitting name for what it was, what it became, and what it is now. One of the most famous representations of the idea of tropical paradise. This isn't located on the main island, rather on Koh Phi Phi Le. Le means little or small in Thai. It's the secondary island in the archipelago and is not permanently inhabited, but somewhat easily accessible by boat. We'll get back to that in a minute. Back in 1998 through 99, classically good guys and world-famous not evil monsters, 20th Century Fox, arrived on the island to film a movie that would come out the next year, The Beach, with that Leo guy, which was based on the 1996 Alex Garland novel about a British backpacker who was given a map to a hidden utopian beach by a crazed fellow traveler. When the movie launched the next year in 2000, it catapulted the island into global awareness. There were accusations at the time from environmentalists that Fox had bulldozed beaches, torn up local vegetation, and planted alien species of plants, causing significant harm to the ecosystem. 20th Century Fox, at the time being owned by News Corporation, a Rupert Murdoch entity, of course denied this, being the morally upstanding citizen that we know him to be. All the way back in 1999, local authorities and environmental groups tried bringing them to court for 100 million baht in compensation, but their case wasn't even accepted by the courts until 2012, more than a decade after production had ended. By 2018, Maya Bay was getting 4,000 tourists a day, arriving on over 200 boats. The coral reefs were dead, fish populations had died or been pushed into other territory, and large amounts of the beach's sand had been washed out to sea because the native vegetation that had maintained the beach had been bulldozed and replaced with palm trees for the aesthetic of the movie. In this same year, local authorities closed the beach to visitors because these islands really are picture perfect, as examples of the commodification of paradise and the extractive power of capital. It will literally destroy the resource that it depends on. The old, we'll sell you the rope to hang them with kind of thing. The bay was closed to tourists for almost 4 years. After reopening, there were strict limits on 300 visitors a day that could go, 1 hour visit maximum, strictly no swimming, and restrictions on the types of boats that could bring them. The same year that it reopened, 2022, 20th Century Fox finally lost their court case and were forced to pay reparations for the damages they'd caused. Instead of the original 100 million baht that had been asked for, they only had to pay 10 million baht. The whole cluster of islands only became so famous in the first place because a big-budget movie used it to portray an idealized version of untouched paradise. This fictitious utopia made the beach so popular that it nearly led to its own complete destruction. It isn't immediately obvious to think of tourism as an extractive industry when compared to things like logging, mining, or drilling, but it is. Overutilization of a resource will inevitably lead to the depletion of that resource, be it trees, metals, oil, or secluded tropical paradises. Only through careful management and stewardship can we maintain these resources and use them in a way that'll be functional and practical for coming generations. The Phi Phi Islands really are a microcosm of the tourism industry and the practice of tourism as a whole. From capitalists doing capitalism to volunteers donating their time and energy to save a place halfway around the world after a disaster, people from every corner of the planet, and complex indigenous communities with everything in between. If you liked the video and made it this far, please lick that like button, pause, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye bye!